items, but since we're recording this, well, I'm going to go ahead and skip through those. But if you do have questions on this video, please do respond in the comments so that we can know what is interesting to you and what you'd like to learn more about. All of us have a reason why we're here today, and it's those stories that connect us all. While you're here, yeah, we're recording the call so that people who couldn't make it can still listen later. So during the next hour, we're going to explore what it means to employ someone in your home. We'll help you discuss a good working relationship through our recommended practices. We'll discuss how you can get involved in changing the way care works in the US by adopting best practices in your own home. We'll identify key components for a successful nanny search, and we'll learn how to get involved with Hand in Hand and with Tiffin. Again, if you have any questions, please just chat them in the comment. Before we get into it, I want to quickly introduce Hand in Hand. We're a national network of people who employ nannies, house cleaners, and home attendants. We believe that it benefits everyone when our homes become workplaces that are just, fair, and kind. We know that in the domestic work sector, the relationships we form with workers in our homes is one of deep interdependence, and that we really need each other. So we help people figure out how to be good employers, and then we work with each other and alongside domestic workers to transform the domestic work and care work sectors to make care and support more accessible to everyone. My own relationship to caregiving and why this work is important to me is that when my family first moved to the Bay Area for work, we had 2 kids who were barely 1 and 4 years old. There were not childcare options for them to be in the same place, and so we hired a nanny who came highly recommended from some friends here. We realized shortly, though, that we needed more hours than she was able to provide, and it was difficult to set up a share with the family that she was already working with. It was really hard reflecting on this to kind of figure it out as we went along, and it was also really difficult to figure out how to sever the working relationship fairly, especially because we were really happy with the relationship that we had developed with her and that she had developed with our daughter. So I wish that the information that we provide today is something that I had at the start. And I also recall from being on parent lists when my 2 kids were first born that questions around pay, vacation time, and just generally being a fair employer were some of the most frequent that I saw in the listservs. It really was friends asking friends, neighbors asking neighbors, and information exchanged via parent networks. It's difficult to establish such an important working relationship via word of mouth, and we know that babies don't come with an HR manual when you bring them home. So although we can't all tell our story today, we do spend a little bit more time on that in our local workshops. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to chat them in the comments. So in the live webinar, we would like to know if folks are employing a nanny or if they had planned to employ a nanny, and just kind of the other questions that you would like to learn more about. Alyce, do you want to talk a little bit more about Tiffin?
Sure. So my name is Alyce Desrosiers, and I came into this work here with the nonprofit after having spent over 23 years here in the San Francisco Bay Area, supporting parents and going with parents through their process to choose nannies that are a good fit for them. So I came into this work as a clinical social worker and getting involved with how to setting up childcare centers, working in a preschool, and doing some federal funding on a study on how parents manage work and family. And in 1996, a friend of mine asked me to help her find a nanny while she was on bed rest with a high-risk pregnancy and with a 2-year-old toddler at home. So I started pounding pavements, and at that time, before the internet, looking at bulletin boards and pieces of paper on a bulletin board at the local parenting agency of women who were saying, "Love kids, will love yours, hire me." And so going through that process with her was really an eye-opening experience for me. And it was then that I started my business at Chirp, Connecting Families and Nannies, and going through a process day in and day out with parents to both identify, to meet, interview, and make decisions about who they would leave their child with in order to return back to work or to get the kind of help at home that they needed. So over these years, of course, I've worked with hundreds of different families, and of course, along the way, I've met thousands of nannies who do this work. I've learned to really value the need for parents to do due diligence, to be going through an informed search in order to make this most important hiring decision. It is all about trust. It is all about working together, and definitely all about making sure everybody keeps the best interests of their child in mind. Just as Suzanne has said, nannies have a very difficult task of working closely with parents in their family's home, and it's a very close and intimate relationship, and clearly one that's based on trust. So in this particular webinar, I hope to give you the nuts and bolts of being able to go through an informed search to make this most important decision. We founded the Institute for Families and Nannies, we call TIFIN, because we've long recognized that parents and nannies both need the support and in order to be working collaboratively to provide good care for children. So we are providing job trainings and education for nannies, and doing this with parent engagement, again, all with the intent to provide good care for children. And at the end of the webinar, of course, we would love to give you more, or be sending you more information about what we're both doing here to support families and nannies.
Thanks, Alyce. So now I'm going to share some context to explain why domestic work can be such a tricky subject. Some folks call it the Wild West. It's tricky enough that we're all on this webinar together. And it also helps to understand why this isn't just an individual issue, but something bigger. So domestic workers are defined as nannies, house cleaners, and personal care attendants who work within our homes, doing the work that makes all other work possible. The history of this industry helps us to understand why organizing in the domestic work industry happens at the intersections of racial justice, labor, and gender justice. Domestic workers have been categorically excluded from basic worker protections in the US since the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in 1938. National labor laws have specifically denied domestic workers, as well as farm workers, the right to a minimum wage, overtime pay, and the ability to form unions, and some of that is changing. But these exclusions are a legacy of slavery, since the original exclusions of the Fair Labor Standard Act were a compromise to get Southern states to sign on, and domestic workers have been fighting to secure these rights since then. Our partners at the National Domestic Worker Association at the California Domestic Worker Alliance have been organizing to win domestic worker protections. In 2010, employers of domestic workers joined with workers in New York State to pass our country's first ever domestic worker Bill of Rights, to include domestic workers under basic labor protections. Since then, California and 6 additional states have passed domestic worker Bill of Rights. And just this year, the city of Seattle won the first municipal Bill of Rights campaign. This is one of few industries in the United States where we find workers and employers organizing together, and HandinHand plays an important role in this work. We continue working with domestic worker movements around the country to do more Bill of Rights and culture change work. But we also realize that passing legislation isn't enough, especially in an industry that's so isolated. We also need to educate and support employers. HandinHand was founded by domestic employers who drew on their own experiences of confusion and isolation in trying to figure out how to be fair employers, kind of like Alyce's story of really learning so much as you go along. And this webinar is based on workshops that our members do in living rooms, in local businesses that serve parents, at schools, and at faith-based institutions. In the San Francisco Bay Area, HandinHand holds workshops bi-monthly in coordination with Tiffin and Natural Resources, and we also have workshops at Bananas in Oakland and other locations. All of this work is based on an assumption of good intent, that we all want to do the right thing, and that fair care benefits workers and employers alike by helping to facilitate effective communication and long-term mutually beneficial relationships. At HandinHand, we recognize that we're employing workers oftentimes in moments of great change or even crisis in our own lives, and that no one hands us a personnel manual when our baby comes home. We don't have a human resources person working for us. A lot of these times, these relationships are really intimate, especially when they're good, and it can feel pretty different from other work relationships. Many times people will say that the person they employ, their nanny, feels like a part of the family, but in fact, we have more success in these relationships and are better employers when we recognize that we're not family, we've entered into a professional employer-employee relationship. And so today we'll start with the basics that however much we feel like family, domestic workers are workers. This is a labor relationship and our homes are in fact workplaces. That's complicated and that's why we're here today. It can be helpful if you see the slide here when we're trying to figure out how to be respectful employers to ground our approach as an employer in our own experiences, in our own workplaces, and what has made us feel valued as employees. So oftentimes, if you're not quite sure what to do or how to do the right thing as an employer, you can put yourself into the role of a worker and see if the answer becomes more clear. Alyce, do you want to talk a little bit about how just this history impacts the quality of care in the industry?
Yeah, sure. You know, as Suzanne has pointed out, that domestic work in this country really has marginalized nannies. They are truly the invisible members of the childcare workforce and work in an unlicensed and unregulated market. Anyone who wants to work as a nanny can post a notice on an electronic bulletin board without really the expectation that they have any experience, any health, safety, or any criminal background checks. And this really, the responsibility to ensure that somebody has had experience, that they have a clean criminal background check, that they are have just the minimum health safety trainings. That burden falls on parents to be doing. So parents really do need to do their due diligence when going through a process to hire. Again, in this workshop, we will take a look at what you need to know and how to proceed through the process to ensure that you've hired someone that is honest, trustworthy, competent, loving, and can really be a true member of your family and work for as long as you need care.
Great. Yeah. And on the flip side, we know that nannies are entering into, people's homes without really any assurances on their end either. And so that's why it's so important to kind of know a lot and to go through best practices as you find someone to work with your family. So at HandinHand, we found through conversations with both employers and employees that there are 3 important things to remember to foster a respectful relationship with those who we hire. And those make up what we call the Fair Care Pledge. It's the basis of all of our tools and resources. The pledge was launched with the support of the National Domestic Worker Association, and it received the endorsement of President Obama. It simplifies the key priorities in the employee-employer relationship. And the Fair Care Pledge is meant to be a good faith statement of intention as a starting point. It means that you commit to doing the best you can by the person you employ. And it's not at all about making people feel bad if they can't do everything. What I really love about it is just there's so many different options. And so you can have a conversation with the person who's working for you about how to be a fair employer. So the 3 points of the Fair Care Pledge are fair pay, clear expectations, and paid time off. We're going to go through these somewhat quickly because we only have an hour together, but don't worry, this is being recorded and there are going to be 2 additional sessions where Alyce and I will do a deeper dive into a lot of these topics. But I'm going to start with fair pay. It's the bedrock of being a good employer. And this is something that may have actually come up for you as you were reflecting on what makes you feel valued as an employee yourself. So our first tip is to pay a living wage. HandinHand recommends at least $20 to $25 an hour for the San Francisco Bay Area. But this can change dramatically, taking into account where you live, if the person is doing additional work like caring for multiple children, as well as the provider's experience. You can go to a living wage calculator for your own specific area. It's livingwage.mit.edu, just kind of for a starting point. And we know that this is complicated for many employers, especially employers of attendants who rely on state funding to pay. And we recognize the constraints. That's why HandinHand is working on issues of affordability as well. Our second tip is to pay for overtime. The best practice is time and a half paid after 8 hours a day and or 40 hours a week. In some states, a Bill of Rights now guarantees all domestic workers overtime, and this includes New York and California. Even so, for states without a Bill of Rights, it is a recommendation and a best practice to pay overtime. It's always a good idea to check where you live because some states and cities have passed ordinances. But again, paying overtime is a recommendation for everyone. It's also the reason why we recommend keeping a timesheet. And our third tip is to pay reliably. You'll want to do so at a mutually agreed upon schedule. Don't pay late, and pay even when you must cancel at the last minute. Just because you don't need her support, she still depends on a steady paycheck. For instance, if you had a meeting that was canceled and you get off work early and you no longer need your caregiver for the day, we do recommend that you still pay, even if the caregiver isn't working for the remainder of the day. Just because your plans changed at the last minute, she doesn't have control over that and was making plans in her life to work that day, as well as depending on that pay. And so we just want to remember that workers have obligations to their own families as well. All right, so open and respectful communication is the second part of the Fair Care Pledge, and it will be the foundation for the relationship between the two of you, providing clarity on both sides for daily tasks. We have 5 tips in this section. The first one is to establish clear expectations and begin to do so during the hiring process. So you'll want to discuss exactly what you need while you're interviewing. This is a great way to make sure that whoever you hire is on the same page as you. For instance, thinking back to the example of having a changing work schedule, if it's not easy for you to predict your schedule, that's something that you can let people know when you're interviewing candidates. We have resources for other things to consider, such as sample work agreements. This is something that we're going to go into in more detail during the next part of this webinar. The second tip is to make a work agreement together now and update it as work changes. So things change, that's life. Who has not had their job description change? But it's important to have expectations in writing and to update them when they change. This is to both of your benefit. Our third tip is to set up regular check-ins and an open door to have conversations. We do recommend weekly check-ins and then establishing larger reviews either yearly or maybe even twice yearly once you start out or in the very beginning. Our fourth tip is to provide feedback. So you'll want to establish from the start a rapport where you can discuss both what's going well and what could go better, so that you can begin to develop your skills on problem solving together. We all know what good feedback and bad feedback sounds and feels like. And again, just remember what it's like to receive good feedback at your job and try to reproduce that in your home, as well as making sure that you have some space for your employee to bring up any challenges and concerns as well. And the fifth tip might seem basic, but especially when you're rushing out of the house to get to somewhere you need to be, it can be hard to remember to just say hello in the morning and to always communicate with respect. So again, the easiest way to think of this is, how do you want to be treated, or how do you like to be treated and to interact with others where you work? This is something that workers oftentimes say makes a really big difference in how they feel about their workplace and ultimately how long they stay on the job. So if you go to the next slide, this is the last part of our Fair Care Pledge, which is paid time off. The first tip is to provide paid sick days. Chances are you may not want someone sick in your home if you can help it, and letting them know that they'll be paid even when they're not feeling well goes a long way to making sure that someone is not coming sick to work. So the worker deserves to be physically and mentally well rested to do her job and for her own well-being. For full-time employees, we recommend at least 5 paid sick days per year, and for part-time employees, that they earn 1 hour of sick leave for every 30 hours worked. In some cities and states, this is the law. So in California, all full-time employees must receive 24 hours of sick leave per year. And for part-time employees, they must earn 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. So again, another reason why keeping a timesheet is really important. And our second tip is to provide paid vacation days. For full-time employees, we recommend 2 weeks of paid vacation per year, ideally at a time of their choosing or at a time that you can both agree to. And for part-time employees, we recommend 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. So say you choose to schedule a last-minute family vacation thinking that you won't need the nanny you employ for a few weeks. This is not the same as her being able to choose when vacation works for her, and she may have her own family schedule and time away to take into account. Just be aware to not focus or to not force your own family schedule on anyone inadvertently, or expect your vacation time to always match up with theirs. In the work agreement, this is something that you can lay out from the start. You can offer for vacation time to be negotiated at a time that you both choose, or you want to be clear if you have non-negotiable vacation time so that that expectation is known from the beginning. This recommendation is especially important during the summer months. Here are 3 steps for paying reliably and offering paid time off during the summer months. The first is to plan a time to talk with the nanny you employ and think through questions like, what agreement do you have in place around paid time off? If you don't have one, this could be a good chance to bring it up. What are your confirmed summer travel plans? What's still in the works? Do you still need help throughout the summer? And what kind of help will you need in the fall? And when does the fall schedule begin for your family? And then finally, remember to ask the nanny what are their vacation plans and what might change for them during the summer. Perhaps their family schedule is changing too. So again, during our live sessions, we would have paused 3 times already for questions that you have. Again, it will be really helpful for us, for people who are watching on YouTube or other places, to put any questions you have in the comments. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alyce to talk about the nanny search process.
Thanks, Suzanne, and a wonderful foundation to be giving parents about how to be good employers to their nannies. So, you know, for parents who are looking to hire a nanny, many of them are tempted to just pick up the phone and start calling everybody that they know that they're looking for a nanny, to jump onto all of the electronic bulletin boards and take a look and see who's out there, and to just really jump into the process. My recommendation is that parents take a step back, because clearly there are, what I'm saying, 7 key questions that you really need to be asking yourself and making decisions about before you even start the search. So I'm going to go through them here. The first is really, what type of care and arrangement do you want? The other is, when should you even start the search process? What are going to be her exact job responsibilities? What are you expecting her to be doing? What's going to be her schedule? And what are your legal responsibilities as an employer when you hire a nanny? What's the market rate? And how does that match up or not match up to the budget that you have for childcare? And then finally, what are the basic health and safety trainings and background check requirements that you want any nanny that you hire to have and to be presenting for you? So over the next slide, please. So I'm going to go through these one by one. So first, what's the type of care and arrangement that you want? So I've listed here 4 different definitions of child care providers. And the first, of course, is the nanny. And nannies really are, you want to think of this person as a person who is providing at least most of the time that she is working as being fully in charge and responsible for the care of your children. That's very different from someone who comes in to be a mother's helper. Mother's helper, really, her responsibility is to work primarily as a team player with a mom who is at home most of the time. And as a team, they are both together managing the care of the household as well as the care of the children. Now, that's very different from an au pair. A lot of parents are confused about au pairs and nannies. They tend to think of them as being similar. Au pairs really are anyone who is non-US born who comes into the United States with a visa to provide childcare up to 40 hours a week of care for their host family for 1 year, with the option to continue for 2 years. And then finally, a babysitter. Babysitters are really someone who comes in and provides as needed care, primarily during evenings or weekends when parents need care. Someone that you could consider coming in for like a date night. Now, the arrangement is either you're hiring a nanny to provide care for your family only, or you go into a share care arrangement. And here, particularly in the Bay Area, we're seeing many families who are opting to create share care arrangements. Now, share care is an arrangement where 2 families hire a nanny to care for both of the children in either one or both of the families' homes, based on the hours and days that care is needed. Now, keep in mind that each family doesn't have to have the exact same schedule. Each family does not have to have children that are exactly the same age or within a certain developmental stage. Shared cares can happen where one family actually only needs part-time care, and that the shared care or the shared arrangement is during the days and hours that they need care, while the other family might need more full-time care. So again, if you are thinking about a shared care arrangement, think about, keep the sort of the options open for yourself. Don't try to match yourself up with another family that needs the exact hours and days that you care. Again, we'll go into a more deeper dive when we're looking at this in the next webinar. Okay, Purva? So when to start the search? For share care, I say start now. The best share care arrangements happen when parents see eye to eye on how care will happen, and then together can give direction to the nanny who's providing the care. And finding the right family can actually happen right away. You don't need to have either the same start date for your nanny or have that be care to have happen within 4 to 6 weeks. So the nanny search itself, I recommend that parents start 4 to 6 weeks before care is needed. A lot happens in this 4 to 6 week period. As you're seeing here, the very first 2 weeks, the first and second week, is heavily devoted to the recruitment and the screening. By the end of the second week, you're well into interview periods, which can take a week or 2 weeks before you start making decisions about who you want to go into a trial with you. A trial is really a serious ask, and that's more of a training period. And you want to give yourself at least a week, ideally 2 weeks, for her to be getting to know your child, certainly your home and your neighborhood, before you actually take your leave to have her start with you. And of course, contracts happen at that point in time. So you can see this is a very short timeline without a lot of do-overs. And so you want to give yourself as much time as you can. And again, 4 to 6 weeks, so that you're not under pressure to be hiring somebody because you need care to happen tomorrow. Okay. So job responsibilities. Standard responsibilities are those that you see here in front of you. Obviously, and in priority, first and foremost, full charge care for your child. And that can include everything that goes on during the time that she's there. So feeding, bathing, changing, planning and taking your child to different daily activities. She should also be expected to be doing any light house cleaning, certainly anything related to the care of your child. So making sure that your child's toys are clean and put away, their laundry is done, folded, put away, bed linen is changed, clean, and put away. And of course, keeping your home neat and tidy or in the same order that it normally is in. And finally, if she's out with your child on different activities, then you can expect and ask her to be running any errands that you might need to be run. Now, this doesn't mean your weekly grocery shopping, but it does mean if you need something picked up at the grocery store or drop off at the post office, if she's out with your child and if it's possible for her to do so, then that certainly is part of her responsibility. What is not her responsibility is cooking dinner for you, or doing all of your family laundry, sheets, towels, or your personal laundry. And of course, it does not include any what we would call heavy house cleaning. So dusting, vacuuming, making beds, cleaning bathrooms, that's definitely not on her list. As you can see here, and as you know as a parent, it's a full day just taking care of children and in anything else that's related to their care. Okay, Purva? Thank you. So nanny schedule. This is another very, very important decision to be making before you actually start the search. So I've put this in terms of, what a typical challenges are in parent schedules and how that can be matched up with the market itself of caregivers. So if you're a parent who's working a non-traditional hours, so you're working either a rotating schedule, you're working evenings or weekends, or if you're working a flexible schedule, then it can be really hard to be nailing down a predictable Monday through Friday, 8 to 6 p.m. schedule for your nanny. So the suggestion would be that you guarantee a certain number of hours per week that you will be paying your nanny, and then you recruit based on a candidate's flexibility in their work schedule to be available when you need care. The other family might have predictable hours, but what we call is an unpredictable commute. And this certainly here in the Bay Area. If you're living in San Francisco and you're commuting down to the peninsula for work, then clearly you need to be recruiting to ensure that the nanny that you hire has flexibility in her day to be able to stay late with notice as it's needed. And then there are other families that need actually more than 50 hours a week. We want to prevent burnout. So definitely you should be considering hiring 2 nannies to share the schedule if you're needing more than 50 hours a week. And that 50 hours typically is a Monday through Friday, 8 to 6 p.m. schedule. That's what we see here in the Bay Area. And then finally, just if you're a family that is traveling a lot, needs a lot of overnight care, then definitely you need to be recruiting and keeping that in mind and making sure that the candidate that you're considering has the flexibility in her personal life and the interest as well to be doing this for you. I made a little brief note here on the bottom that as you all probably know, everyone's going to need some extra help here and there. So please do always make as part of your job description that you're needing additional care on evenings and weekends as it's possible. Okay, Verva? Legal responsibilities. This is pretty heavily weighted, and I'm just going to go through it briefly here, and again we'll take a much deeper dive later because parents really have a lot of questions when this part of the process comes up. Parents, when you hire a nanny, you have responsibilities to 5 different government agencies. The first is the Department of Homeland Security. And they expect that parents hire a nanny that has documentation or work authorization to work here in the US. The other is the Internal Revenue Service. And the IRS is very clear that nannies are not independent contractors. They're hourly wage employees. They're to be paid for all hours worked. And parents are obligated to withhold the required FICA, Social Security, and Medicare from their gross earnings, and then of course issue a W-2 at the end of the year for the nanny to be filing and paying taxes on earned income. The other is, excuse me, the Department of Labor, and as Suzanne has pointed out, nannies are by law to be paid overtime. And overtime is greater than, in this particular industry, 9 hours a day and 40 hours a week. And as Suzanne had pointed out, definitely a recommendation that parents and nannies keep timesheets so that everybody is clear about all hours being paid, including overtime. The other is the state of California. And I will say certainly for the state of California and for others, you should check your state requirements. But here in California, nannies are entitled to workers' compensation. So parents, and this is a tip, please do call your homeowner or your tenant's insurance agent and put a rider onto your policy to cover a household employee for workers' comp. The last is DMV. And again, this comes as a surprise for many parents, but you are, as an employer, vicariously liable for any accident or injury that your nanny, your employee, gets into while working for you. So this vicarious liability can be offset. Clearly, if a nanny uses the parent's car, she should be put on as a second driver. And if she uses her car, then the recommendation is to check with your auto insurance agent for their recommendations to offset vicarious liability. In my experience, oftentimes that recommendation is to put out an umbrella policy on the parent's auto insurance policy, again, to offset any potential vicarious liability. Okay. Further?
Quick question, Alyce.
Yes.
So if you hire a nanny through an agency, do you need to go through all these steps? Because
yes,
you're contracting with an agency as opposed to an individual?
Yes, that's correct. You know, nanny agencies, and again, there are different agencies, but clearly when before contracting to work with an agency, you should have a discussion with them about their ability to walk you through the different legal responsibilities that you have when you hire a nanny. Absolutely. Here, I give this information because parents should know what they are, so that if you're doing an independent search on your own, then you could also be doing due diligence.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. So hourly rates and your budget. This is, I've given you rates here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I know Suzanne's rates look somewhat different than what we have here, but I'll start by saying that clearly here in the Bay Area, for those who live here, you're well aware that the cost of living is very high, both for housing, for food, as well as other living expenses. So it is, again, like the Wild West here for hourly rates. They are continuing to go up. And what I'm seeing now, the one-child rate, the range is very large, as you see, anywhere between 23 to 30 plus an hour. For two children, we're looking at anywhere from 28 to 35, and for some nannies, they even go higher than that. And for a share care rate, I tell parents budget 35, but please be prepared that nannies are going up to 45 an hour for a share care rate. Hourly rates are not as straightforward as they might see here as you're looking in front of you, because clearly they determine about whether you pay taxes or not on care. The lower rates, of course, are what we'll call non-taxable or net income rates, with the higher being more taxable rates, so that a nanny will net the lower rate after taxes are withheld. It's certainly determined by the amount of experience, the quality of that experience, whether she's had any formal education or training, what her previous employment has been, what she's been paid, and what she has been basing her own cost of living on. And then finally, without question, on your own budget. Before you really start, again, before you start calling your friends and posting notices on bulletin board, you really have to take a close look at what the current market rates are, what your budget is, what you can afford, and stick a nail in the sand and not veer off from that. Because, you know, and this is my tip here, the more you pay is not always the better that you get. As long as you're within the rates that I'm showing you here, there are so many variables that determining what is the right fit for your family. And do keep in mind that, you know, if one nanny is asking for 35 an hour and another nanny that you like equally well is asking for 23 or 25 an hour, that paying more doesn't guarantee better quality. Really, the fit is much more complicated than what somebody is charging. And again, as long as you're paying a fair market rate and being a fair care employer, then paying more doesn't always guarantee better quality. Okay, so Purva, thank you. And so the last question that you need to be looking at and making decisions about are the other requirements. And I'm going to say that you don't have to make a decision about it. It's something that you should expect. CPR and first aid training is a condition of employment, and please do make sure that it's for infants and children, it's not for adults. She should have a clearance for TB. She should, if clearly you have a child under a year, but I would say definitely under 7 months of age, she should have a whooping cough or Tdap vaccination as a condition of employment. You should not only get a copy of her driving license, but a copy of her driving record, and then go through a criminal background check. Here in California, we're very, very fortunate to have the opportunity to have Trustline do background checks for in-home childcare providers. They will use fingerprints and a photo ID to clear someone through 3 different indices. One, the state of California Child Abuse Index, the other state of California Department of Justice records, and finally an FBI check for any federal crimes or misdemeanors. Okay, so Purva, I'm not quite sure how we're doing for time, and I know I'm giving a lot of information, but if you just give me a heads up how much time we have left, I'll just go quickly through the process itself to hire.
Yeah, so we have about 8 minutes left. So if you can go through quickly, and then at the end, I want to have a little bit of time reserved to talk about your upcoming sessions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. So thank you. So what you see here in front of you is really a typical hire search. And these are the nuts and bolts. First and foremost, getting out your your job description ready. And this job description will be easily written once you've made decisions about how to handle all of the questions that we just recently looked at. And then you go through the recruitment process. So getting the word out at all of the online posting boards and so forth, that is definitely the next process. You'll then be screening those people that you hear from that are interested in your position, making decisions about who you will interview, and going through an interview process. A word to the wise, you're not going to be hiring someone after the first date, so do consider interviewing as a process. And then, of course, there's a trial period. And as I've mentioned early on in this discussion, trial periods really are training periods. It's not allowed just try you out, and if I like you after 4 hours, then I hire you. It's a serious ask on both sides to see if this is going to be the right place for both people. And then finally, contract. And as Suzanne has pointed out, contracts are a very important part of the relationship. And so that does constitute the end of the formal search to hire, and one should have a signed contract prior to start date. So I'll end it there, Purva, and again, we will be going into much more of a deeper description or deeper dive into each of these areas in the webinar that's coming up.
Great. Suzanne, do you want to say a few words about your session?
Yeah, so, well, one thing I wanted to invite everyone to do who's watching today is to think about where will we go from here? And the first thing that I hope everyone will do is to sign the Fair Care Pledge, because through Hand in Hand and the Fair Care Pledge, you'll get ongoing support and community, a community of folks supporting each other in the process of becoming respectful employers, breaking out of isolation in a time that can be hard and emotional for many families. So I'll share a link in the chat box where you can affirm your commitment to the 3 principles that I talked about earlier. And so please sign the pledge if you haven't already. We will offer specific resources to those who sign the Fair Care Pledge, and we'll send you a series of emails to break these principles down one at a time so you can think about them and implement small changes over time. We know that we have given you a lot of information today. So with that, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the next part of the series, which is best practices for employing a child care provider. We'll go into more details on the above recommendations, and we'll also have a lot more time to take questions. One thing that we will plan on doing also is to walk through a sample work agreement step by step. The one that we can send folks who sign up for that webinar is, it's a 10-page document, so there's a lot in it. But just as Alyce mentioned, these are all questions. While you'll finalize the work agreement with the person that you hire, you'll want to know kind of generally what your family's needs are in most of those categories before you even begin the search process.
Got it. Thank you. Very useful. And Alyce, would you be covering in your session where to post, the job listing or how to find a nanny?
Yes, exactly, Purva, thank you. So, this deeper dive, we will definitely go in more detail through the nuts and bolts of a nanny search. We'll clearly be going through a much more detailed level, where the legal issues are, how to offset any of the legal decisions that risks that one has. And taking a closer look at how compensation and benefits work in this particular hire. And then, of course, going through all of the details about how to go through a process. That, of course, does include, online postings, just as you had brought up, in online sites. We've been able to have a wonderful opportunity with Urban Sitter to be offering discounts to those who participate in this workshop. So that's an opportunity for parents who are looking for care to be getting a discount on their nanny search process. So there's a lot to be talked about. I think in addition to having a lot of content, we clearly will be looking at how do you know? And when you're meeting with somebody, that this is a person that would be the right fit. So what does fit look like? And how to be using not only your head in this process, but also your heart, so that you're able to blend them together to say, this is the right person for us at this time in our family life, and this is who we want to partner with to go on this journey together with. So that's the content. Again, I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot to be said, and I really would want parents to have all of the tools that they need to be able to jump into this process with a good amount of information, so you could be feeling confident. It's been my experience, again, I've been doing this for 23 years, that, you know, parents know if you do your due diligence, you know what you want, you know what the market is, you ask good questions, you use your head, you use your heart. Parents make right decisions. And I know really so well, and Suzanne knows well, that the women who are doing this kind of work are amazing women. And there are just really many excellent nannies out there providing excellent care for parents and raising very healthy, good children. So I guess that's where I want to stop. Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you, Suzanne and Alyce. So those who are watching this, please post your questions in the comment section. And also it would be great if you could join us at our next sessions. The information can be found on our website, inceptive.org/workshops. And we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you.
Wonderful. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.